The evening sun dipped below the horizon as a solitary figure trudged through the deserted parking lot of the airport, a place that had once buzzed with life. Samantha, a weary traveller, felt a creeping unease as she approached the entrance, the airport's fluorescent lights flickering ominously. A heavy fog rolled in, muffling sounds and swallowing the last vestiges of warmth. As she stepped inside, the silence was oppressive. The usual din of announcements and bustling crowds was replaced by an unsettling stillness. She glanced at the departure board. Flights cancelled, gates closed, the glowing letters spelling out delayed in an endless loop. Her footsteps echoed through the vast terminal, the polished floors reflecting a distorted image of her anxious face. Samantha's phone buzzed in her pocket, but when she pulled it out, there was no signal, just the creeping realization that she was utterly alone. The vending machines stood like sentinels, their contents untouched, while the air carried a musty scent of mildew and something sweeter, more decayed. As she wandered deeper into the heart of the airport, she began to notice flickering shadows at the edge of her vision, figures that seemed to dart just beyond her line of sight, whispers that echoed off the walls, chilling her to the bone. Samantha stumbled upon a deserted baggage claim area, the conveyor belt still, its surface smeared with what looked like dried blood. Panic surged as she spun around, heart racing, convinced she was being watched. The overhead lights flickered again, plunging her into momentary darkness. In that fleeting moment, she could swear she felt breath on her neck, cold and rancid, but when she turned, the space behind her was empty. Her breath quickened, and she felt the urge to scream, but the sound got lodged in her throat. She needed to find a way out, to escape this forsaken place that felt like a prison designed to ensnare the living. As she navigated the twisting corridors, she stumbled upon an old security room, its door ajar. The monitors flickered with static, then suddenly displayed glimpses of the terminal, each camera feed showing scenes from hours earlier, except the people in those images were not real, but ghostly apparitions trapped in a moment of time. She froze, transfixed by the sight of a family that had vanished years ago, their faces twisted in fear as they pleaded for help that would never come. Just then, a loud bang echoed from behind her, jolting her from her trance. Instinctively she turned, but the corridor was empty, save for the eerie hum of the air conditioning. Samantha pressed on, every step heavy with dread. The exit signs glowed with a sinister red hue, promising salvation that seemed perpetually out of reach. She could hear faint laughter, childlike, haunting, drifting through the halls, leading her deeper into the heart of the airport. The walls seemed to close in, each corner she turned revealing only more darkness. Suddenly she found herself in a long corridor lined with boarded-up windows, the glass shattered and jagged. She felt an unnatural chill, and as she passed a tattered piece of paper fluttering against the wall, she realized it was a missing person flyer, her own face, staring back at her. Her pulse raced as she turned to run back, but the hallway twisted impossibly, every direction leading her back to the same spot, her mind fracturing under the weight of despair. She shouted for help, but her voice was swallowed by the thick air, leaving her in a suffocating silence. Desperation clawed at her throat as she stumbled into the restroom, only to find the mirrors reflecting not her own visage, but a swirling mist of faces, all contorted in anguish, begging for release. A familiar voice pierced through the cacophony, a malevolent whisper promising her that she would join them, become part of this eternal nightmare. Samantha bolted from the restroom, driven by sheer instinct. She needed to escape, to find the exit that would lead her back to the living world. Yet, as she navigated the labyrinthine halls, the environment seemed to conspire against her, walls closing in, the floor shifting underfoot, as if the airport itself were a living entity, eager to ensnare its prey. Shadows coiled around her ankles, dragging her down with an invisible force. She fought against it, heart pounding, desperation surging with every step. Just ahead, she spotted a flickering exit sign, hope igniting within her. But as she reached for the door, it swung open to reveal a swirling vortex of darkness, the threshold between her world and the next. With a surge of adrenaline, she stumbled backward, realizing she was not alone. Figures began to materialize around her, lost souls forever trapped in this accursed airport. Their eyes hollow, mouths twisted in silent screams. They reached out, imploring her to join them in their eternal despair. Samantha's heart raced, terror igniting her senses. She bolted down the corridor, the darkness pursuing her, a cacophony of whispers rising to a deafening crescendo. She sprinted, adrenaline propelling her forward until she burst through a set of emergency doors, emerging into the parking lot, but the world outside was different, twisted, surreal. The sky bled red, and the asphalt seemed to pulse beneath her feet. As she ran, the realization hit her like a punch to the gut. She was still trapped, the airport's malevolent grip unyielding. She glanced back, the terminal looming like a dark monolith, its windows now filled with shadowy figures, their faces twisted in ecstasy as they feasted on her fear. Samantha turned and ran, the sounds of the airport's laughter ringing in her ears, knowing she could never truly escape the horror that lay just beneath the surface, ready to reclaim her the moment she faltered. Samantha's legs burned with exertion as she sprinted across the parking lot, the eerie glow of the airport fading behind her. Each frantic step felt like a futile attempt to escape a nightmare that had woven itself into the very fabric of reality. The sky was a sickly shade of crimson, casting an unnatural light over everything, as if the world itself were bleeding. She could hear the faint echoes of laughter trailing after her, a mocking chorus that sent chills down her spine. Desperation clawed at her, urging her to keep moving. She stumbled into the street, but the asphalt seemed to ripple beneath her feet, the familiar world around her now distorted. The sound of an approaching car grew louder, its headlights slicing through the fog like knives. Samantha waved her arms, heart racing as she desperately tried to flag it down. The vehicle slowed, revealing a driver with hollow eyes and a twisted smile. But before she could reach the window, the car sped away, leaving her alone once more, the laughter swelling in the distance. Frustrated and terrified, she turned back toward the airport, feeling a magnetic pull drawing her in. She knew she shouldn't go back, but the sense of impending doom was overwhelming. As she stepped through the glass doors, she was met by a disorienting sight. The terminal was transformed. The familiar layout was gone, replaced by an ever-shifting maze of dark corridors and flickering lights. Her heart sank as she realized she was back in the clutches of the horror she had tried to escape. The atmosphere thickened around her, each breath more labored than the last. Shadows danced along the walls, whispering her name, promising her secrets that she could not comprehend. A sudden chill swept through the terminal, wrapping around her like a shroud. She pressed forward, instinct guiding her as she navigated the hallways, desperately searching for an exit that felt increasingly elusive. With each step, Samantha felt herself growing weaker, the shadows whispering sweet nothings that clawed at her sanity. Memories of her life outside began to fade, replaced by visions of the lost souls she had seen earlier. She recalled their twisted expressions, the way their hands had reached out as if to pull her into their eternal torment. A flicker of doubt crossed her mind. What if she was meant to join them? What if she was already too late? Shaking her head to dispel the thoughts, she stumbled into a waiting area. The chairs were overturned, the remnants of abandoned luggage scattered about like the debris of a forgotten war. In the corner of the room, a child sat alone, his small figure hunched over a tattered book. As she approached, he looked up, revealing eyes that glimmered with an unsettling knowledge. "They're coming for you," he said, his voice a chilling whisper that echoed in the silence. "You can't escape." Samantha's heart raced. "Who? What do you mean?" she asked, desperation creeping into her voice. The child merely smiled, a knowing look crossing his face. "You have to find the door," he said cryptically, before turning his attention back to the book. The pages rustled as if stirred by a wind that did not exist. Before she could question him further, the lights above flickered violently, and the air crackled with a tension she could feel in her bones. She turned, her instincts screaming at her to flee, and raced back into the corridor. The shadows thickened, swirling around her as if alive, tugging at her limbs and whispering secrets that clawed at her mind. "Join us," they hissed, their voices layered like a haunting symphony, beckoning her deeper into the abyss. Panic surged as she sprinted down the hallway, heart pounding in her chest. She could hear the echoing footfalls of something or someone pursuing her, a dark presence that thrived on her fear. Just ahead, a door appeared, bathed in an otherworldly glow. Hope surged within her as she barreled toward it, desperate for escape. But as she reached for the handle, it felt as if the door was moving away, slipping further from her grasp with each frantic step. No, she screamed, frustration and terror mingling as she lunged forward. The door suddenly swung open, revealing a swirling void beyond a gaping maw that promised freedom, yet radiated dread. Without thinking, she leaped through, feeling a rush of cold air engulf her as darkness closed in. When she landed, she found herself back in the airport, but this time it was more twisted than before. The walls throbbed like a heartbeat, pulsating with a life of their own. She could hear the laughter again, clearer this time, echoing around her like a taunt. Samantha struggled to her feet, disoriented, the air thick with despair. She was drawn back to the baggage claim area, where the bloodied conveyor belt had returned, now alive with the shadows of passengers lost to time. "What do you want from me?" she shouted, voice trembling as she confronted the darkness. In response, the shadows coalesced into a woman with hollow eyes and a face that was both familiar and terrifying. "You're one of us now," she whispered, her voice a melodic caress, yet laced with malice. "You've crossed the threshold." Samantha recoiled, shaking her head in disbelief. "No, I refuse. I won't join you," she cried, but the woman only smiled wider, the shadows swirling around her like a cloak. "You already have. This place feeds on fear, and you are its latest offering." The realization hit Samantha like a cold wave, crushing her spirit. She was trapped, ensnared in a cycle of horror and despair. Yet, deep within her, a spark of defiance ignited. She refused to let the darkness consume her entirely. Gathering her strength, she pushed past the figure, determination surging as she fought against the shadows. As she ran through the terminal, the lights flickered wildly, the walls closing in with every frantic step. She could hear the whispers rising to a deafening crescendo, a cacophony of voices urging her to succumb. But she pressed on, seeking that elusive exit, the promise of freedom just beyond her reach. Finally, she found herself in front of the same swirling door she had encountered before. This time she would not hesitate. Taking a deep breath, she flung herself through the threshold, surrendering to the darkness with a fierce resolve. If she was to be lost, she would do so fighting. Emerging on the other side, she found herself in an endless expanse of fog, an eerie quiet settling around her. The shadows were gone, but so was any sign of the airport. It was just her and the void. Samantha stood, heart pounding, feeling both liberated and lost. Then, in the distance, she saw a flicker of light, a soft glow that pulsed gently like a heartbeat. With cautious hope, she started walking toward it, feeling the weight of despair lift slightly. But as she moved closer, the light began to dim, the shadows creeping in at the edges of her vision once more. "No," she shouted, determination flooding her veins. She would not let the darkness win. She picked up her pace, the light growing brighter with each step. The whispers returned, swirling around her like a storm, but this time she stood firm, pushing against the tide of despair. As she reached the light, it exploded into a brilliant glow, enveloping her in warmth and clarity. For the first time, she felt a sense of peace wash over her, the shadows retreating, their whispers fading into nothingness. In that moment, she realized that true escape lay not in fleeing the airport, but in confronting the darkness within herself. With newfound strength, she stepped into the light, letting it envelop her completely. The airport, the shadows, the laughter, all of it melted away as she embraced the warmth, feeling the heaviness lift. And as she stood there, bathed in radiance, she understood that she could leave the horror behind, reclaiming her life from the clutches of despair. But even as she turned away from the darkness, a haunting echo lingered, a reminder of the price paid for freedom. As the light began to fade, she felt the faintest brush of shadows against her skin, a promise that while she had escaped, the horror would always be a part of her. And deep down, she knew the airport still waited, ready to lure her back whenever fear whispered her name. As the light began to dim around her, Samantha felt an unsettling mix of clarity and dread. The warmth that had enveloped her started to recede, pulling back like a tide. Shadows began to slink from the corners of her vision, creeping closer, whispering promises of safety mixed with the chilling reminder of her past fears. She stood firm, knowing that the true battle lay ahead. With her heart pounding, she faced the encroaching darkness. "You won't take me again," she declared, her voice stronger than she felt. The shadows paused, as if momentarily stunned by her resolve. She concentrated, remembering the faces of those lost to the airport, the whispers of the child, and the haunting laughter that had chased her for so long. They were all part of her, yet they did not define her. With a deep breath, she summoned the light from within, visualizing it bursting forth like a beacon. The glow began to shimmer at her fingertips, pushing back against the shadows, illuminating the space around her. The darkness writhed, angry and fearful, as if it were alive and recognizing a threat. "You don't belong here," she shouted, letting the light surge forth, its brilliance piercing the gloom. In a blinding flash, the shadows recoiled, their whispers transforming into screams of rage and despair. Samantha felt a surge of power coursing through her, a sense of liberation as she pushed forward. The light expanded, washing over her, illuminating the fog and dispelling the darkness that had lingered for so long. As the last remnants of shadow evaporated, she found herself standing in the familiar baggage claim area, but it was different now. The bloodied conveyor belt lay still, the air filled with a gentle hum of life, rather than despair. The fluorescent lights above flickered, but no longer with malevolence. Instead, they bathed the room in a soft, welcoming glow. Samantha took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the airport's hold dissipate. She glanced around, half expecting the shadows to return, but instead, there was a profound stillness. It felt as if she had crossed a threshold, emerging from a nightmare into the realm of the living. Stepping forward, she noticed the ghostly figures of the lost souls hovering at the edges of the room. Their expressions were no longer twisted in anguish. Instead, they appeared peaceful, almost grateful. Samantha felt a sense of closure wash over her, understanding that she had not only freed herself but had also provided them a chance to find their own peace. As she walked toward the exit, the doors swung open effortlessly, revealing the night sky outside, now a deep indigo speckled with stars. It was beautiful, a stark contrast to the crimson hues she had escaped. She stepped through, the cool air hitting her like a refreshing wave, invigorating and alive. With every step away from the airport, she felt lighter, the weight of fear lifted. But even as she moved forward, she knew the shadows would linger, remnants of a battle fought deep within her soul. They were a part of her now, reminders of her strength and the fragility of life. Samantha paused at the edge of the parking lot, looking back at the looming structure, its dark windows reflecting the starlight. A shiver ran down her spine, but it was not one of fear. It was a recognition that she had triumphed over the darkness, and though it would always be there, it would no longer control her. With a final deep breath, she turned away from the airport, embracing the night and the promise of a new beginning. The laughter that had haunted her was now a distant echo, replaced by the soft whispers of hope. She walked into the night, knowing that while the horror would always be a part of her, she had chosen to step into the light, reclaiming her life and her freedom.